I was tired of changing my clock every time daylight savings kicked in, so instead, I built myself an Apple clock. This is how I did it.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Tekavou, the channel where I give everyday products a much needed software update, whether they want it or not. Look, I love tech. At least I love it when it works. Take this clock for example. It has one job to tell time, but right now, it's dead, just sitting here mocking me. So sure, it only takes a couple of minutes to replace the batteries and set the time, and I'll be at peace for a while. But even then, in a few months' time, daylight savings will be over and I'll have to do this song and dance all over again. Unless I manually adjust it, it'll be off by an hour for half a year. And that, my friends, is what I call unnecessary friction. Let's fix this with tech. Instead of spending 5 minutes adjusting this clock, I'm going to do something simpler and more practical. I'm going to build my own clock, one that can actually keep up with time and with me. Now the first step is figuring out what kind of clock I want to build. When I'm not standing in the exact right spot on Earth where I can actually see this clock, I usually just look at my phone or my Apple Watch to tell time. But what if I took my Apple Watch and I blew it up clock size? A big old Apple Watch that you just hang on the wall. Basically an Apple clock, or for legal reasons, let's just call this the TekaClock. Not only would it be able to tell time, but it would finally put an end to this biannual daylight saving shuffle that's plagued society and grandparents everywhere. And that's just the beginning. A TekaClock comes with way more perks than a regular clock, but we'll get to that later. In order to build this clock, I need a screen. The simple solution here is to grab a cheap $20 screen from Amazon and be done with it. But where's the fun in that? Instead, I'm looking for an excuse to take my original iPad out of retirement. First, let's see if this even works. Slide to unlock and boom! Look at all these ancient apps. It still has iTunes. YouTube's icon is from an era where people actually watched TV shows on televisions. And Maps? That's still Google Maps behind the scenes. Do any of these even work? Let's see. Starting with YouTube. Nope. Messages? I don't even think this is iMessage, but hey, at least it loads. What about music? Oh right, this even predates Apple Music. The App Store won't even load, so I can't even download any new apps on this. I can already tell that this is going to be a struggle. Before I continue, remember this old 30-pin connector? People love to complain about the lightning cable, but this even predates complaining. Pro tip, if you ever walk into a hotel room and see one of these sticking outside a bedside radio, you're not going to have a good night's sleep. Okay, we have our screen, but what else do we need? One of the key features of the Apple Watch is the digital crown, so we're going to need to build one of those. Thankfully, that's actually not too complicated. We just need a rotary encoder, which looks like this, and we'll 3D print a little shell over it. But here's where things get tricky. To actually use the encoder, I'll need to build an app, except I can't. This iPad is so old, Apple doesn't even acknowledge its existence anymore. I can't publish an app for it, I can't even update it. What if I look for an older version of Xcode? After a few minutes of research, I finally found one, except my computer is too new to run this version. Because Apple doesn't believe in going backward, I'm one swift error away from throwing this iPad out the window and building a smart sundial instead. Maybe I'll keep that for a future video. We're gonna have to think outside the box for this one. Literally, I need to power this iPad with a better brain. I've opted for the Raspberry Pi 02, which I picked for 3 reasons. 1, it's tiny so I can fit it inside the clock. 2, I can connect a rotary encoder directly to it. And 3, because it's the only computer I own that won't ask me for a software update while I'm filming this video. In an ideal world, I'd run everything on the Raspberry Pi and just video out to the iPad, but you can't do that with the original iPad. I also kinda wanna squeeze every ounce of usefulness out of this prehistoric tablet. So here's the plan. The Raspberry Pi will act as a web server, and the iPad will load a full screen version of Safari, and that will be our watch face. Now there's a few little gotchas with Safari because this isn't modern Safari, this is 2010 Safari, back when Flash was still a thing. It's missing loads of features that would make this project easy or even insane. Since Apple has officially declared this iPad dead, I figured that there would be no harm in jailbreaking it. Plot twist. Most of the apps from that era are just as dead as the clock I started with. On the bright side, I was able to install a tweak that boots the iPad directly into Safari and it skips the slide to unlock screen. So even if I have to restart the clock, it just pops right into the watch face. Finally, a win. Thanks to the magic of video editing, I'm going to show my progress in a non-chronological order, like a Christopher Nolan movie. Just with fewer explosions, more plastic, and you're not going to get your money's worth. In reality, I made sure that the clock actually worked on the iPad before I went through the trouble of designing a 3D case for it. I would never have designed the case before I made sure the iPad worked. Designing the case was actually pretty straightforward since I have the original Apple Watch to base it on. I did have to take a few creative liberties since scaling up an Apple Watch just makes it look weird and disjointed. More importantly, I needed to make sure that my iPad can actually fit inside this thing, so I needed to take those dimensions into account as well. The design was built front to back. First, I made a shell for the iPad to rest in. Then I measured and cut out holes for all the buttons. Next, I added some little tabs that'll glue into place to stop the iPad from falling backwards like it's trying to escape the project. I then made a hole for the rotary encoder. That's where the digital crown will go. I also added a fake bulge as a side button, like those weird molded on buttons you find on dollar store toys. They don't really do anything, and it's the same thing here. I really had no use for an extra button. And finally, I left enough depth in the case to fit the Raspberry Pi and all of its cables. Next, there's the backing, with some side screws to hold everything in place. Now, if you squint, you might notice a hole in the back. You're probably wondering what it's for. That's for MagSafe. Oh wait, legally speaking, let's call it MagnetSafe. The idea is to mount this urinal puck-looking thing with a shocked face onto the wall. The wires will be fished through its shell and power the clock. The whole thing is held in place with magnets, but the cutout in the design gives it extra support and helps it sit more flush. Now, while this doesn't use wireless charging like a real MagSafe, this setup will provide power and it will make my wires look intentional and not sloppy. Here's my original test print. A few things were off, but it was actually pretty close. It now lives a second life as a bath time toy for my kids. Floating plastic clock frame as a toy? Totally normal. Now it's time for a quick montage. You know, the part where the pros show their build come together in under a minute, all set to royalty-free synth music. I'll do the same, but mostly to spare you from watching me assemble things backwards and make mistakes. The final build came together pretty well, but I did have to make a few post-print tweaks. I cut open the back and ditched the magnets, mostly because the fit was so snug I'd have to use a crowbar to even remove it anyway. I also had to cut open the port near the bottom so it wouldn't overbend the wire. But overall, I'm pretty happy with it. It looks great, it looks like an Apple Watch but bigger. The iPad fit perfectly and so did the digital crown. So now we're on to the fun part. Time to build some watch faces and see if this even works. We'll start with the modular one, which is actually the watch face I use most of the time. Now, I'm not going to bore you with footage of me aimlessly coding and googling errors from 2009 because nothing on this iPad works the way it should. Instead, we just jump to the future. And this is where the clock actually starts to shine. Top right, we've got the digital clock with the seconds ticking away. Top left, that's the date. Very fancy. Underneath that, the activity rings. Now, full disclosure, these are purely decorative right now because Apple doesn't give you access to health data in Safari, especially not Safari from the before times. I'll probably repurpose it later on to track family arguments or how many times someone asks me, is this a real clock or a fake one? If you have any idea of what I should track on these activity rings, please let me know in the comments below. And finally, we have the weather forecast, which is actually real and reasonably accurate, or at least as accurate as a weather forecast ever is. It's actually hitting a real weather API and returning that information, which I'm quite surprised worked on this device. And that's it, that's my watch face, or clock face. It tells time, it looks cool, and best of all, I don't need to update it twice a year or change its batteries. Like a real Apple Watch, I couldn't just stop at one watch face though. And that's where my earlier foreshadowing finally pays off. Remember that digital crown I kept talking about? Unlike the fake plastic button bulge, which is just here for vibes, the crown is actually fully functional. Here's how it works. When you tap the screen once, a little green icon appears. Behind the scenes, this icon is showing you that there's now a live communication between the iPad and the Raspberry Pi. Once the connection is live, rotating the crown causes the Raspberry Pi to tell Safari to load the next watch face. First up, we have Flux, or at least the best approximation of Flux that I could create with the iPad 1. The idea here is that the screen slowly fills up every second until it hits the top, then it resets. Next up, we have the infamous Mickey Mouse watch face. Except for legal reasons, I can't use actual Mickey Mouse. However, and this is the rare case where copy law right becomes oddly exciting, the Steamboat Willie version of Mickey Mouse is now public domain, so I'm rolling with that version. I created a few little animations to bring him to life, and the number closest to the seconds digit wiggles. Oh, and the backgrounds? They swap out every hour just to keep things fresh. But why stop at Apple Watch faces? I have the power to build whatever I want. Here's another watch face I made called Inspire. Why is it called Inspire? Because mildly motivated didn't have the same ring to it. This one's similar to the modular one, but with a few upgrades. The date, time, and weather are all still here, no surprises. But now, right in the middle, there's a box that spits out either an inspirational quote or a fun fact every few hours. Nothing says seize the day like a random reminder that octopi have 3 hearts. Over on the bottom left, my kids asked for a countdown to the release of the Nintendo Switch 2. Once that countdown ends, the next one kicks in. It's basically a to-do list, but for hype. On the right, we've got upcoming events, holidays, and birthdays. Realistically, this is the watch face I'll default to the most often. And lastly, we have my YouTube subscriber watch face, because what's the point of building your own clock if it doesn't validate your online existence? This one shows me how many subscribers Tekavou has in real time. Looking at the current number, honestly, I probably could have gotten away with a static image, but hey, prove me wrong. Hit that subscribe button and like magic, I'll see it update right here on the clock. Unless my kids have switched it back to the Mickey Mouse watch face, which, let's face it, they probably did while I was filming this. So there we have it. I've successfully built a clock that doesn't need manual intervention just to do its job. And the best part, since the iPad has a built-in battery, I've coded in some safeguards. If the power goes out, the clock will still keep on ticking for a few more hours. Or, if I really wanted to, I guess I could just wear it as an oversized watch. Unlike most of my other projects, which usually end up in storage 10 minutes after I finish filming, this one's actually going front and center in my living room. And honestly, I've got tons of ideas of how to make this one even better. I can see myself designing all sorts of watch faces. Fun ones, practical ones, seasonal ones, and if I ever upgrade the iPad, I could even use the camera and the mic for contextual things, like if a certain person is in front of the clock, I can have a very specific watch face. So what kind of watch face should I build next? Let me know in the comments and maybe I'll turn a few of the ideas into a future short. If you enjoyed this build, hit that like button and share it with somebody who still hasn't changed their clock since daylight savings kicked in. You know who they are. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Tekavou.